Anna, for this wonderful introduction. And it's such a pleasure to be here. Indeed, you know, I mean, it's a mouthful what I'm doing. You know, I'm of course with you here, and I really enjoy doing it at the Autism Research Center. But besides all the research we're doing here in music therapy and autism, we've all done some research when it comes to neonatology, especially the link from neonatology, extremely preterm birth and going into autism. What I would like to do today, and I was kindly given some more time to give you a bit of an overview, what it all actually means and how we can actually get there. And this is, of course, not working as it usually doesn't. And then I have to press this one first, and then, well, you know. So I want to give you an overview of music in the brain. Because what we do at the Chime study is we're looking at music and music therapy and how it affects children with autism. Obviously, there will be some neuroscience in there as well. Then I will move to music therapy in the tertiary NICU and NICU care, and then I will give you a glimpse into the future. And as it is a public talk and there's a lot of people, maybe even online, I have a little disclaimer. I will not share the methodology with you that we are going to submit to the Wellcome Trust, but I'm more than happy to discuss the methodology with you over lunch. So, going into music and the brain and how it all comes together, and thinking about what the brain actually is and why it is such a, and why it actually is this weird apparatus that we have in our heads. We all carry one. We all have one that is similar. We all have one that actually understands the world as it is. But if we look into music and music listening, and especially music participation, there are 4 different forms of how we can deal with musical stimuli. First of all is passive listening. What is passive listening? You're sitting in a restaurant, there's music in the background playing. You're kind of noticing it, but it does not really have your focus. It's not in the field of attention. Until the moment that there is a piece of music that captures your memory, and it becomes active listening. Your discussion while sitting in the restaurant changes to that particular piece of music, and you actually have more brain activity loading. Don't quote me on those numbers, they're just there for the magic of television. Then you decide with your table partner to kind of move out of the restaurant and say, let's go and play this. Because it is such a profound song, there's a certain memory maybe attached to it, so there's even more going into there while playing the song together. And last but not least, you decide to improvise a grounded song because you feel I will play the domino, it's not boring. Let's create something new in the spur of the moment. And all of these activities and all of these ways to activate and participate with music, you can use in music therapy. So you can use passive and active listening, receptive music therapy, playing, active music therapy, and improvisational music therapy techniques. And there's so many more out there. But before we're going to go deeper into the brain, let's look at the origins of music. Where is music actually coming from? What is music actually? Why are we so taken to music? Why do we actually enjoy music so much? And this is one of the very first musical instruments that have been found. It's around 25 to 30,000 years old. It's a flute made of a bone of a bird, because the bird bones are hollow and they drill holes in there. And you can actually play it. They made a replica in Tübingen, and while playing it, it actually creates the pitches that you would like to have. You would argue that the oldest instrument may be a drum, so a hollow tree trunk with some sheepskin over it maybe, or any other tree trunk. If we look at chimpanzees, for example, they use tree trunks to communicate across the jungle and saying certain things. Yet another conversation to be started on Discord, is there meaning on music or not? But let's not go into it. But how old is music actually? And where does it really come from? Sound of a star of a particular galaxy, and each galaxy has its own particular sound, whether it's a pulsar, whether it's a quasar. And of course the educated people on you will say, well, in terms of physics, there can't be any sound in space, there's a vacuum, you can't hear it. And you're completely right, you can't. But what is sound? Sound is a combination of waves. of frequencies that travel through a vacuum. And if you're interested in the video, it's around 2.5 hours long. A friend from NASA sent it to me and said, if you talk music, you have to talk about the sound of the stars, because that's where music comes from. And he told me that if you argue that the Big Bang has happened, and I'm not here to dispute any other theories that are out there, because it's a Grundsatzdiskussion and will be different. But if we believe that the Big Bang has happened, music has been created in the first quantum fluctuation and inflation of the Big Bang, together with light, when the third frequencies and the third waveforms were created, meaning that music is as old as 13.7 billion years. And maybe that's the answer why it touches us, why it is part of our human integrity of understanding the world around us in terms of music. So looking into music and the different components with melody, timbre, rhythm, the combination of all of those and the melodic structure, harmony, all of these aspects make music and make it something that is so special and so related to our human being and our human understanding. So from the Big Bang to our inner ear, because when the sound travels from the stars 13.7 billion years ago through the ether and space, and it hits your eardrum starts to move. So a mechanical signal, literally moving, music literally touches us, is translated into an electrical signal, and then we hear different pitches. There's some thunder, and the lower spectrum of sound, a dog barking, mid-frequencies of sound, human speech, a telephone, all frequencies and all pitches are represented throughout our cocktail. And those little hair cells start to move with different pressures indicated and actually translated into the brain to make sound and understand sound for what it is. But the big question now is, and I mean, I'm talking to scientists, is are we our brains and our brains alone and nothing else than our brains? And that's a little question to you. Who believes that we are our brains full stop? Who thinks that we're something else, the body, the soul, a transcendental being of the ether? Maybe a combination of the two. As academics, you always have to wait and read all of the questions before we answer. We don't know. The good old question that Descartes has posed of dualism, is the body that has power over the mind, or is the mind having power over the body? Is it a combination of the two? Well, unfortunately, or fortunately, we are in the brain renaissance, or in the new renaissance of the brain, but pretty much everything can be explained by or through the brain and how we understand it. But the question, as I said, is not only as old as Descartes has posed it, but even as old as Plato, who said that the brain must be the seat of our mental processes. He was convinced. And Aristotle, being a good student of Plato, said, no way, the heart is the organ of thinking, of perception and feeling. The brain can only cool the passion of it. And Hippocrates argued that man ought to know that from the brain only arise our pleasure, joys, laughters, and jests, as well as our sorrows, pains, griefs, and tears. This age-old question of dualism, what has power over whom? Do we need the brain to understand the world, or is the body just enough to understand the world? Is something that goes, or is a red thread throughout neuroscience, psychology, neuropsychology, maybe medical sciences, in terms of understanding. There's always two camps. There's always the brain camp and wisdom camp that thinks there's a combination of the two. But we need to be aware that the brain is nothing without the body and vice versa. So now that we know that music is 13.7 billion years old, that we know that there's different representation of frequencies in the cochlea, we can make the jump through brain and body into music and music listening. And the next video is a live fMRI scan of people in an fMRI scan while listening to the music that you hear. And what you're going to see is different sides of the brain. Red is more activation in the brain, meaning increased oxygenation. And blue is less activation, or slow, slight deactivation. And there's this very delicate balance and a very wonderful dance between them. even look at the white matter trends. So if it translates these three-dimensional pictures of the MRI and the DTI, the diffusion tensor imaging scanner, we can create a two-dimensional representation map of all those brain areas, and you can clearly show that the whole brain is active when you listen to music. Not at the same time, because it would be overstimulating. I was not think there's a site towards maybe some autistic individuals where there is an overstimulation because too many brain areas are active. But overall, if we listen as neurotypicals, we have the frontal lobe active, the temporal lobe, the parietal lobe, the thalamus as a key structure, our motor cortices, hippocampus, amygdala, the cerebellum, the brainstem, the anterior cingulate cortex, nucleus accumbens, and insula, which comes in with dopamine production, and last but not least, of course, executive function as they are represented in the frontal lobes that we're taking it into neuropsychology. So you see, it's a global cerebral process. You need both sides, left as well as right, to understand music and to make sense of music, especially when it's language.
So are you taking questions now?
Carry on, yes.
Can I just ask, if you were to repeat that experiment after the person has already heard the music the first time, you have the same or similar responses to the brain? Does the brain adapt itself once it's familiar with the
you would have a similar response because the baseline is always the same. It kind of travels from your ears through your brainstem into the thalamus and then reaches out to all these brain areas to code the sensory input music. And then what happens is when the magic happens, the amygdala and the hippocampus, so amygdala with emotional decoding and fight or flight reactions, and hippocampus with memory, will create a direct link to the frontal lobe and double checking it and looking for errors. Do I know it? Is it different? Do I recognize it? Is it changed within the context? And then it will feed back to the thalamus, back to all these errors, and they will start learning to see that piece of music in a different context. So it is similar at start, and then it kind of grows outside of it and starts to reconnect all different aspects of it. Thank you. No worries. Yeah. So from having the brain and knowing now that the brain is active while listening to music, that we have 4 different ways how to stimulate individuals with music, and to know that it's a global cerebral process, we can now move into the clinical applications, which in this instance I would like to share with you the music therapy that we have done in the tertiary NICU care and in the neonatal intensive care unit. So with no further ado, we all started at some point like this, regardless of where we are from. So we are swimming in the womb of our mothers. We are very happy in there, and our brain is developing as much as we are developing, from 29 days over 52 all the way to 20 weeks. And now here, this threshold of extremely preterm birth starts. At around 22 weeks, that was one of the youngest participants that we had in the study, survived. But 22 weeks, you can see the differences between the 20-week-old brain and 6-month-old brain. The brain is not fully developed at all. So it is not able to recognize certain stimuli that are out there once you are born. And it's not just the brain, it is also the guts, the heart, the lungs. The whole system is underdeveloped and is born extremely preterm. This threshold between 22 to roughly 29 to term is a perfect candidate to actually look into how we can induce forms of therapy that are non-pharmacological, because if you introduce something pharmacological to a very young system, you don't know what the longitudinal effects will be. We still use it and do it, of course, because that's the status quo in medicine. But you can also look actually into how you can adapt a certain body within that age range to change something. So what we've done, we've decided to recruit around 17 infants. We had a 90% participation rate, but the gestational age of a median 27 weeks, and 61% of those were male. We were doing a feasibility and pilot study to see whether we can actually provide live-performed music therapy in the neonatal intensive care unit. And live-performed means there's a music therapist that is highly trained to work with neonates next to the bedside, interacting with the child. We used different materials. We looked into the maternal and child intake questionnaires that we used clinically, the NEO comfort score, near-infrared spectroscopy, which is oxygenation in the brain, GM for monitoring. GM are general movements. You can look into how the child develops cognitively by assessing the movement of the child. The more fluid the movement, the better the connectivity. The more kind of staccato and fidgety the movement, the connectivity in the brain is less developed. And we looked into DNA methylation. We took stool samples before the music therapy, after the music therapy, and at follow-up at 6 months. And we were looking for gene markers in there for stress. There's roughly around 16 to 18 markers that are associated with stress to see whether we switch those on or off. And you can do that through DNA methylation, which is a chemical process where you use the stool sample, you extract certain proteins, and you switch them on and off, or look whether they're on or off, depending on how they have reacted after. And we use the intervention, which is a music therapeutic intervention. It's called the song of kin, played for 10 to 15 minutes with the parents present. And what the song of kin is, you can imagine you are lying in an incubator and you have in a neonatal intensive care unit a lot of sounds, especially beeps and blobs from all lovely machines, like the heart rate monitor. 24/7. So what the music therapist does, she or he sits next to the child and actually first listens to the sound, and you just one more note, and you add another note, other song of another. So what you do in the therapy session is you try to use the existing sounds of the unit and translate them into something that is much more natural, as we argue, to the child in terms of listening to it. And why song of kin? Because we're going to use the songs that the child is used to while it was in the womb and the parents were singing to. It could be a nursery rhyme, it could be a certain cultural song that was part of the upbringing. So we use that information and try to translate it into those beeps and blobs that are happening in the unit. And while we're doing this, we noticed a couple of things. One was that during, or before, during, and after the music therapy, the value of the comfort score, and the NEO comfort score is an assessment where you look whether the child feels comfortable in the NICU and in the bed, did not change. So we know that while the music therapy was going on, there was nothing distressing for the child. But the child did not feel less comfortable while playing to it. We also looked into acoustic environment of the NICU, and that's an extremely interesting finding. This was a NICU with 15 beds, and 1 is very noisy, 5 would be quiet, and before the music therapy it was relatively noisy, 65 decibel, maybe even 70. If you imagine that the Concorde starting was 90 to 95 decibel, you can imagine how loud it would be. During the music therapy, the whole unit, not just the bed, the whole unit quieted down significantly. Because while I started playing those 2 notes with the heart monitor, the nurse next to the incubator, which was sitting in another incubator, said, why is this going on? Out of a sudden, the consultants that were rushing in were like, the whole unit quieted down. And this was even prolonged up to half an hour and 45 minutes after the music therapy session. So the music therapy does not only have an impact on the child and on the parents, but also on the staff in a rather hectic unit. So once we knew that it works, that there is something that we can find, we decided to do the near-infrared spectroscopy. And just quickly, near-infrared spectroscopy, you place a sensor on the guts, you place a sensor on the brain, and you are sending light sources through those, and you are looking into the oxygen saturation of the guts, so how much is their supply, how much is used, and you compare them with the head. And by looking at the light sensors, you can measure the amount of oxygen at the outer part in the gray matter of the brain here. And while the music therapy was going on, before as well, to half an hour before, during music therapy, after music therapy, we looked into those important parts of supply and consumption. And especially when it comes to supply, we've seen differences in oxygenation flow. So there was an increase of flow of oxygen, blood pressure changes, resistance, cardiac output, even arterial oxygenation saturation. And last but not least, when it comes to consumption, we even notice sedation. And what do we mean by that? Looking at those oxygenation levels, you have 3 individual children here, infants, and this child had a line going of, well, rather steady, lowish oxygenation levels, and during the music therapy, it was activated, so it raised oxygenation. And it prolonged afterwards as well. The reason for that being the child was rather calm, rather sedated, and we wanted to increase activation. We wanted to engage with the child by using those, going back to those beeps and blobs, so the beep, 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 because you have the heart rate as the base, which is, say, 189 beats per minute. That would be a child in the heart. And you just use the music, beep, 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 and you start doing it slower, beep, 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 beep. You can actually get the heart rate of the child down just by synchronizing with those few sounds from the original heart rate down, and that's what pretty much happened here. Sorry, here, because that is where it's going down, here it's going up. So what we want to do was sedate it here, and we start to play faster. So beep, 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 beep. So you start to raise it up, and oxygenation levels go up as well. Here it was the opposite. The oxygenation levels went down during the music therapy session because the child was already overactive, and we wanted to sedate it and actually let it go. But instrument 3 was rather interesting because it had a very irregular movement of oxygenation in the brain, which means that there's a lot of differences in the connectivity and how the brain actually tries to make sense of the world. During the music therapy session, it actually calms down all together. The child was focused, the child was turned to the music therapist, to the parents that are present on the other side, and bringing it all together. And once we stopped, it started to go down. This was a child with HIE, that's hyperischemic encephalopathy. It's a brain disease, really. It's a problem in the brain that happens straight at birth, and what you do with children with HIE is you cool them down to reset the brain. So there's a connectivity error within HIE, and what happens is once the child is born, you take the child, cool it down to roughly 27 to 28 degrees Celsius, and you over a 3-day period to slowly warm it up until it's around 37 again. And this helps the brain to kind of reset. And we had one child that was having this treatment. After those 3 days, the brain oxygenation, the brain parameters were still not very, very clear. That's why we tried it with music therapy. And we noticed while we're actually offering a certain stimulus, we can regulate and balance those oxygenation levels in the brain. These are just 3 examples from the music therapy study. So overall, the role of music therapy in extreme preterm infants. So the results show that live auditory stimulation has a positive effect on feeding ability, pain scores during procedures, as well as neurological outcomes that we measured in the NICU clinical assessment. We looked into specialized live music therapy, which is administered by fully trained music therapists, which increases the well-being and pain perception and feeling of the child, as well as engage in musical exchange with shared rhythm and effects. The infant's co-regulation and stabilization is supported. And we have an investigation which is required to provide more specialized MT interventions during the cooling period of infants. Last participant can actually do it during the warming up and the cooling period of the child, and not after, to support the accessibility in parents as well as to support the development. And last but not least, of course, future studies include infant with brain injury and should consider gradual increase of stimulation, auditory, visual, and tactile. It's usually in music therapy studies, you kind of exclude brain injury infants because they're too fragile. But maybe it's an idea to actually bring them all together into one cohort, individual groups. Are there any questions about the music therapy before I go into the future?
Is there a guarantee that the song you're using is not going to distress the child, like for all the children?
The thing is, we don't use a full song. There was research done 15 years ago where they used music pre-recorded, and there was a song and just played it, and the child was there straight away. You could see it in the brain activity. You could see it in the EEG, even the post-MRI pictures. A lot of damage was done. That's why we use 1 or 2 notes integrated with it, and it's based on the song that the parent would like to sing to the child. And the parent will hum or sing to the child, but that's something the child is used to. So if the child is already grown up with the voices of the mother and the father, and the parents are singing to the child, we incorporate it into the therapy session. But when the parents are not there, we actually try to use and mask the sounds, the bad sounds, so to speak, of the NICU with those two notes, integrate the song back into the child's memory. So going into the future, or as they said in Futurama, right, we're in the future now. So a tiny, tiny little glimpse, and the next video with sound, it's not videos with a lot of sound. I would like to invite you to close your eyes. If you are at home or wherever and you're having headphones, put them kind of the level down a bit because it could be harming to your ears. There's a disclaimer, just close your eyes. Imagine you are back in bed this morning where everything was still peaceful and quiet. No emails, no meetings, no people bothering you or claiming your attention. And you're kind of relaxing and enjoying a peaceful morning. And you're waking up to this. This is the actual sound measured inside of the incubator, not outside, inside of it. So you heard the beeps and blobs, the beep, 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 which you can use to create music with. You also heard the ch, that with a constant oxygen supply into the incubator, because you have to provide a lot of oxygen. There's also a heating element in the incubator and the fan that is moving, so a lot of mechanics. While measuring it inside of the incubator, you can imagine being exposed to this 24/7, it will change your perception of sound and of the brain. So what we know is once children are released from the NICU and are going home, a lot of them cannot fall asleep unless you put on the hoover or the headlight, because they are so conditioned that So this has kind of triggered us in combination with the music therapy approach, because we noticed, as you remember, music therapy calms down the whole unit, not just the child itself, to start creating something that we call the Neosound Active Noise Cancelling Incubator. And the name Active Noise Cancelling Incubator is focusing on diminishing sounds to an absolute maximum, because we cannot create an environment that is zero sound, because you have the oxygen needed somewhere in there. But what we are trying to create is a as calm as possible environment, alleviating all those sounds. We don't need the sounds, because we can actually get rid of them within the incubator. And once it's quiet, we can start introducing sounds that are necessary for the development of the child, say language, say auditory development, like the mother's voice or speech and other aspects, once we got rid of them. But how do we achieve that? Well, we are in the age of artificial intelligence. We are in the age of machine learning. And as wonderful as all of these beautiful technologies are, you can actually use them to your advantage. Because what you can do, you can create a representation of your brain. And we have worked together with the Human Brain Project on that as well. And we started to feed the Google, as we say, with numbers. Because you can use numbers for pretty much any representation of music as you want. It's not about creativity. It's not about anything to do with amazing music. But it's 0 to 9. You can teach a machine to understand music. Why 0 9? Melody. 8 notes. And electrons to it. Create some more steps. Rhythm. 2/3, 4/4, 4/4. It's all numbers. And you start creating multi-layers of the particular sound or noise, whether it's the beep beep or whether it's a sh or whether it's something else. And it starts to try to discern and understand those in different situations, but constantly feeding into an artificial brain. And the artificial brain is based on data that we just extracted from clinical research, so how the brain works while listening to music. So once it starts clustering all of those individual notes into different layers of sound, it will create a convolutional neural network, which means it will look for similar sounds, not exactly the same, but similar sounds, and try to mask those as well. So not every sh will be the same, because the pressure of the oxygen can the child will need a different oxygen flow. Therefore, this algorithm will start to learn around those sounds, minimizing the computational output by understanding the world and things around it, something that we call cognitive economy or artificial cognitive. And once it has understood all these different sounds, we create a spiking network, which is the closest representation to how our brains work, by taking individual aspects of sounds, of distress, of other things, even cry detection, and using them in order to represent the whole sonological environment within the incubator and around it. The two songs that you've just heard, while the numbers were learned, were both composed by artificial intelligence. Whether you like them or not, it's up to you, but it's, at least they are derived. So once we know how the sound works and how it actually is in there and how we can use noise image in the incubator, our ultimate goal would be 35 decibel. And 35 decibel that we're all very quiet now, that's 35 decibel, the only thing that I would switch on is the computer. Then we would have to around 35 decibel. Realistically speaking, we would have 45 in an absolute laboratory-based sound, but it's all about active noise reduction, design of quality components, and feed forward aspect, and especially when we're looking how this can be achieved, is looking into noise cancelling headphones. Because the technology is already there. It's a question whether we can get it small enough to fit it in. So if there is a disturbance, there is a sensor here, a reference sensor. There is a controlled signal and a controlled speaker. What we're doing, we fight the fire with fire, so we cancel sound with sound. It's pretty much like all noise cancelling headphones work. Within the incubator, within the pod, no problem, we can do that. Microphones, speakers. The problem that we are currently having and experiencing is the oxygen supply that you put on those, the seat. It's very, very thin tubes, and you can't actually put anything in there. And we have developed a tiny little plug that actually cancels out the noise in the plug, in the tube, but we can't build it that small quite yet because we don't have A, the money, and two, we don't have the means to do it because technology is not as advanced. But in larger tubes, it actually works. That's something that we are really, really chuffed about. So with the noise cancelling, we also want to look into movement and how we can digitalize the general movement, as I had said before, because they give us a lot of insight into how the brain actually develops of the child. And we are now in the final stage of actually finalizing the algorithms to understand how the child moves and what the computer is actually learning about the child, the representation of the child as well, and how it can be translated into three-dimensional models of the child and be used within a machine learning algorithm. It's a thing that is literally that big. You put it above the incubator and it records the child continuously in movements. And the funny thing is the makers of it built in a camera and a microphone, so when the child is distressed, we can call the parents on the phone while the child is distressed. The parents can talk to the child through this thing when they are not in the room or anywhere close. So this is all within the. And the future research, as the future obviously is saying, is from the noise cancelling incubation to the recording of general movements, also looking into the development of the brain, maybe even into structures of the autistic brain. But especially what the most and the key concept here is not necessarily whether it alleviates or does anything with autism, but about hypersensitivity and about hypersensitivity to sound, because it's not just for the autistic community that suffers from hypersensitivity to sound or hyperacute sound. It's also us, because we're living in a world that is increasingly louder and louder and louder. How we can actually manage this, and how we can manage this at birth and maybe even pre-birth, because healthy aging starts at birth. And here I would love to share the methods. And here I would love to give you more insight into what we're going to do, but we're currently finalizing a welcome trust application for a fellowship, which will explore not just the clinical side of music therapy in the NICU, but also the technological side of the noise cancelling incubator and the technological advances in there. So I cannot share them with you here, but I'm more than happy to talk about it over lunch. And Springer Nature has just invited me to write an edited volume on active noise cancellation in the NICU and the future of the NICU as well, which is going very, very well. I invited, I think, 25 authors and 18 have said yes already. But there is a lot of momentum actually going on there. Summarizing, we have been talking about a lot of things. I gave you quite a lot of information, and it's maybe overwhelming, but we were talking from the beginning, where's music coming from? Passive listening, active listening, playing, improvisation. We talked about the scientific part, whether it's qualitative or quantitative analysis. We need a combination of different parts of science to understand what is happening in the incubator. We talked about the medical sides of care, cure, and sometimes daring to do something different, something new, and to explore it. And we talked about technology, where innovation, development, and creation modeling all come together. In the end of the day, it's about the patient. It's about the person that we actually treat. And it's more than just transdisciplinary, moving beyond inter and even multidisciplinary. We actually have to look into a deep disciplined approach where we find the boundaries of our own discipline to find the next frontier that we actually have to step into. But I mean, I can stand here and talk all day. Let's let Albert Einstein finally tell us that maybe not everything that counts can be. Maybe we can't prove that music is such a brilliant thing. Maybe science doesn't have all the answers. And maybe we just have to sometimes accept that something works for what it is and use it in a clinic because there is some proof. But who am I? I leave the trouble to you. So you can either take the blue pill or you can take the red pill and follow down the rabbit hole into music research. And with these words, thank you so very much for your attention, and a big shout out and round of applause for the whole team from different institutes from the Netherlands, Germany, Italy, America, England. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Artur. It was really great, really interesting. So we will just have some time for questions. We do have